Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in the stream. Today, fallout after UNESCO grants Palestine full membership, and how violence in Syria has spilled over into neighboring Lebanon. Our digital producer, Ahmed Shabaldeen, is here looking out for your live feedback as always. Tweet him using the hashtag AJStream. Joining him on the couch today is Joseph Dana, a journalist based in Ramallah and senior writer for 972 Magazine. Joseph, tell us what 972 Magazine does.
So 972 Magazine it's really an exciting project of a number of different Israeli bloggers, writers, journalists. They came together about a year ago and decided to bring our collective links in the social media world together in order to make a platform that got better global and international reach. And do you guys have a particular editorial perspective? We have no editorial perspective, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're so successful in embracing the social media environment. I mean, we agree on general political issues, like we're all against the occupation. I think that's very safe to say. But in terms of an editor saying you can't write this or you can write that, we don't have that kind of thing. So you're leveraging each other's social media presence to amplify one another's voices. Exactly. We're trying to embrace that immediacy and that intimacy of the platform. Interesting, interesting. It's really good to have you here, and I'm sure your readers are tuning in as well, which is really cool for us. I know that our show is about you, the community, just like their magazine is. So if you've got a story that you want to share, follow us on Twitter and use the hashtag AJStream. You could wind up right here in the stream.
Hey, I'm Mark Plasek. I'm a professor at Georgetown, a lawyer at Ward & Ward, and I'm on the stream.
On Monday, Palestine became the newest full member of the UN's cultural organization, UNESCO. Only a few hours after the vote, the U.S. State Department held a press briefing where it announced the cancellation of millions of dollars worth of funds to UNESCO. Video was sent to us by many in our community of an AP reporter questioning spokeswoman Victoria Newland over the decision. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
You said in your opening, you said that this was is regrettable, premature, and undermines our shared goal. Whose shared goal? Who shares this goal other than the 13 other countries that voted with you? Yeah.
Countries all over the international system share the goal of a Palestinian state in secure borders.
How could they possibly do something that you say is so horrible and detrimental to that process? Yeah. How can you still count on them as sharing this goal?
You'll have to speak to them about why they made the decision that they made. We considered that this was, as I said, regrettable, premature, and undermines the prospect of getting where we want to go. And that's what we're concerned about.
Okay, and how does it undermine, exactly how does it undermine the prospect of where you want to go?
The concern is that it creates tensions when all of us should be concerting our efforts to get the parties back to the table.
The only thing it does is it upsets Israel.
Now, this decision disappointed many, and one gentleman on Twitter, @Yasertina, created a hashtag called Donate to UNESCO. He's been asking people to give money to the organization in order to make up for the shortfall left by the approximately $60 million US or 37 million British pounds that Washington has pulled out of the organization. In response to his call, you've seen a number of other people tweeting the idea that they should support this concept. You've got one here. You also have another person saying that they should get graphic artists and web designers involved in that project. On Tuesday, the Israeli government called for the accelerated construction of settlements and decided to halt money transfers to the PA in response to this UNESCO vote. Joining us now via Skype is Yousef Munayyer, Executive Director of the Jerusalem Fund and the Palestine Center in Washington. Welcome to the stream, Yousef.
Thanks. It's good to be with you guys.
It's good to have you here. Now, we've got a number of questions coming in, and we're going to try to ask all the questions today from our online audience. We actually have an interesting one here from @FreeHetzkamp on Twitter that says, why does the U.S. give money to the Palestinian Authority but stops funding if UNESCO recognizes Palestine?
Well, you know, it's a good question. I think one of the things that's really had light, shined on it because of this entire initiative at UNESCO, not just UNESCO, but at the United Nations and at the other organizations which will follow after this, is this entire question of not only U.S. funding for different programs in Palestine and internationally, but generally U.S. policy. And it really highlights the absurdity of all of this. And it has to get us to question, as the reporter, which you showed earlier at the State Department, began questioning, what is the meaning of all of this? How can we talk about the establishment of a Palestinian state through a peace process which has led us further and further away from that, and then stand in the way of the rest of the world when they want to take other measures to bring it about? So I think that this entire strategy through the different international organizations, while it may not change much on the ground, will certainly raise the type of questions that need to be asked about really an absurd policy generated here in Washington that has, for example, the United States withdrawing its funding from UNESCO while the Israelis are going to continue their membership in UNESCO. So one has to ask the question, why is it that the United States is more anti-Palestinian in the international community than the Israelis? And I think that if this strategy generates those type of questions among the American public, then it might bear some important fruit for the Palestinians.
Well, I actually want to bring another question to you that is coming again from our audience that is really related to the initial video that we saw, which is basically the U.S. is claiming that the UNESCO vote is detrimental to Palestinian-Israeli relationship. How? This is from @Nawara82 on Twitter. What is the argument against this vote?
You know, it's a good question. I think that's a question that needs to really be directed to the halls of power here in Washington, D.C. If you look at the action that they took in response to the vote, which was in line with, a congressional legislation cutting off funding to UNESCO, when the Palestinians took a step that is completely within the law and applying for membership within an international organization, the United States was ready, willing, and actually followed through in applying a stick, a punitive action to punish the international community in this case, and has been very clear about their willingness to punish the Palestinians for these types of measures. However, when the Israelis take illegal measures by building settlements in occupied territory, in contrast to international law and the Geneva Conventions, there is no sticks that are applied. At most, we hear language like the United States is disappointed. And until we see some sort of balance in the response from the United States, it's unlikely we're going to see a change in Israeli behavior.
Yousef, you mentioned, the settlements, and I want to get to that in just a little bit, but I want to read a tweet from Elsal92 where she's criticizing the bid. She says, perhaps UNESCO passing the bid is merely symbolic and will not change what is happening on the ground. Palestine is not free. So perhaps stating the obvious to a certain extent, but then Rodney Proctor weighing in saying, shame on the Obama administration for caving yet again to the Israeli lobby. Bibi is using it as an excuse to grow a land grab. Now, we saw some breaking news just moments ago, Yousef, of this, quote-unquote land grab. They are going to cut funding to the PA, not the security arm, but also build more settlement units. What do you make? Is there a correlation between that and the decision of the UNESCO?
Well, yeah, I wanted to bring a question to you, Yousef, as well. People are saying that this Palestine statehood bid could spell the end of the two-state solution. That if this does not go through, that's it. We've got no more two-state solution, and we have to think about what's going on. Now, Judge Richard Goldstone, the famed South African judge, wrote a piece in today's New York Times, I'm sure you've read it, saying that Israel does not have an apartheid system in the West Bank. And yet we have this news that just broke that they're going to build new settlements. So do you think it's time to start talking about what the reality on the ground is and forget about this two-state solution business?
Well, I think, as far as Justice Goldstone's piece is concerned, I'd refer him to the statements of various Israeli prime ministers who've said that the continuation of the occupation makes them face an apartheid-like struggle. So it's the Israelis themselves, including at the highest levels of their government, who have been willing to use the very apartheid analogy that Judge Goldstone requests that we abandon. I think that this entire bid strategy forces us to think about a different paradigm and distance ourselves from this framework of United States-led negotiations for an outcome, a resolution to this conflict. Whether it's two-state, one-state, whatever it is, I think is a separate question. But the idea that Washington can even-handedly mediate, I think, is one that is most directly challenged by this entire strategy, because it highlights Washington's inability to function as a mediator. We see that the executive here, which is Barack Obama, and which is supposed to make foreign policy, is hogtied by a U.S. Congress, which is very much in line with pro-Israel interests, and making it impossible for the Obama administration to put any real substantial pressure on the Israelis. So where we go from here is not necessarily clear, but what we definitely know is we can't go back to Washington-led mediations that only contributed to the further colonization of Palestinian territory.
Yousef, I want to leave you with one final question from our community. This is also on Twitter, @ilamzoni is asking, saying that it's important to understand the Palestinian reaction to the UNESCO vote. How are Gazans, refugee, and diaspora communities reacting?
Well, I think there's a certain sense of hope, a certain sense of triumph that is accompanied anytime you have such dramatic international support for the Palestinian cause. And I don't think that we should underestimate the fact that the entire world was really, with the exception of very few countries, many of them very small island nations in the Pacific that have smaller populations than some Israeli settlements, was standing up in unison and in support of the Palestinian cause. That's important, but the reality of occupation will make that joy, will make that hope dissipate after a while. So while Palestinians are generally welcoming of this international support, unless it can be translated into action that eases the burdens of occupation, it's unlikely that this strategy is something that's going to be welcomed as something that could deliver on all of the Palestinians' hopes.
Thank you, Yousef, so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So obviously there's more work to be done, and it's actually pointed to us by @LiveJ on Twitter, who's saying that, retweeting the AP that's reporting that the Palestinian envoy says the aim is to join 16 other UN agencies within weeks. This is a story that we're definitely going to be following. Be sure to share the stories that you're following with us as well. Send us a tweet using the hashtag #AJStream. We may be able to feature your suggestion in a future episode.
So today's feedback is about Qatar. In what many of you have called, quote, a surprise move, Qatar's Emir, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, announced plans to hold elections for its legislative authority, the Shura Council, in 2013. Now, elections had been planned for 2008, but postponed several times since then. Now, the decision comes without any real provocations in the streets of Qatar or online, unlike some of Qatar's GCC neighbors, which have seen civil unrest this past year. And many have been attributing this to Qatar's GDP per capita, which is among the highest in the world, and its relatively small local population. I think it's just about 250,000 citizens or so. Now on Twitter, Tom Gara, a UAE-based journalist, joked about Qatar's abundant wealth. Right here he says, Qatar is so rich, its 2013 parliamentary elections will also elect the parliaments of Greece, France, Libya, and 19 United States, or states in the United States. Now, even before this year's Arab uprisings, Qatar formed what many might call as unconventional alliances. For example, Qatar hosts the largest U.S. pre-positioning military base in the world, while also holding joint military exercises with Iran. Now, some from the GCC view this announcement as a natural step for Qatar. For example, Ahmed al-Zahrani, he's a Saudi human rights activist. Right here he tweeted in Arabic, but we'll translate it for you. It says, "It seems that Qatar's support for the Arab revolutions is reflecting positively on the government's mentality in allowing the people to determine their destiny." And in an interview with 60 Minutes from 2003, the Emir himself perhaps foreshadows some of today's developments. So let's just play a short clip from that interview for you.
Do you believe that democracy is an essential ingredient for change?
Well, any people, they want to develop their countries, they have to practice democracy. That's what I believe.
But still, many questions remain, including this one from Al-Girgawi on Twitter, who asks right here in Arabic again, Qatari brothers, when using the term, quote, legislative elections, does that mean the council will have the power to actually legislate in 2013? Now remember, this is just one of many short stories that you've shared with us, but if you want to share your stories, photos, or videos with us, you could always use the hashtag AJStream. But for now, here's a quick look at the pictures of some of those people who are tweeting us right now.
The Syrian revolution has entered a new phase as deadly clashes have swept onto Lebanese territory. There are reports that Syrian forces are carrying out military attacks in the northern regions of Lebanon. This is in an attempt to find Syrian army defectors and weapon smugglers. The army is also being accused of kidnapping and planting mines along the border. Take a look at this map that I have on my screen. The violence is taking place primarily near the Bekaa Valley. Many towns and villages there have no clear border between the two countries, and actually a majority of the residents in the area in fact hold dual nationality. Syrian forces are justifying the incursions as a result of the confusion over lines of demarcation. Joining us now via Skype to discuss this is Rami Khouri. He's the director of the Issam Fares Institute of Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. Rami, welcome to the stream.
Thank you.
So I want to go once again straight to our online community. From Twitter, we have @Mughrabi saying, any change in Syria certainly will have its effect on Lebanon, but I don't expect a civil war. I expect it in Lebanon. And is this a question? What's happening in Syria? Could it potentially have more detrimental effects in Lebanon than in Syria?
Well, the relationship between Syria and Lebanon is a very old and complicated one. Because you have political factors, geographical factors, family, demographic relations, and religious and ideological factors all spilling into each other. So it's really hard to separate these two countries into two neat, distinct entities. There's so many overlaps between them, and the Syrians dominated and ran Lebanon essentially for about 25 years after the civil war. So you have many factors that see tensions or dynamics in Syria reflected in Lebanon, mirrored in Lebanon, spilling over into Lebanon, and vice versa. The Syrians, the government of Syria and many Syrians have always been concerned about Lebanon being used as a soft underbelly to provoke things in Syria or to develop plots against Syria. And this is not based on imagination. This happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s. You had Syrian exiles in Lebanon who plotted coups and things of that nature. So there are these tensions between them, and it's very possible that tensions in Syria could spill over into Lebanon. I think the factor mitigating against this now more than before is that the Lebanese have gone through a very terrible civil war, and they learned a lot of lessons in that war, one of which is that civil wars don't solve anything. Everybody loses, everybody suffers. So I think the Lebanese are going to be really, really on the alert not to allow themselves to be used either intentionally or unintentionally as a proxy for any tensions that arise or conflicts that arise in Syria.
But is it possible, Rami, that this is already happening? Some have speculated that the Lebanese military has been slow in responding to these Syrian army incursions, and given that the Lebanese parliament is currently dominated by Hezbollah, an organization allied with the Syrian regime, is it possible that there is actually a political will or lack of political will to respond to these incursions in Lebanon?
Well, this is extremely complicated, and it is one of the great challenges that the Lebanese people face, which is the balance between their own sovereignty and true independence in terms of taking care of themselves and their country and their security, and at the same time, the linkages that exist between many Lebanese and Syrians and also Iranians in many cases, including Hezbollah, as well as linkages, say, among many Lebanese and Saudi Arabia or the United States. And in the years past, you had linkages between some Lebanese and Israel. There was cooperation. So you have a long tradition of Lebanese groups, different groups. There's 18 different confessional groups, and many of them have developed strong strategic links with outside powers, including the Vatican and Russia and Greece and the U.S. and Iran. And so it's not just a question of Syria and Lebanon now. It's a question of many external powers meddling inside Lebanon, which reduces the ability of the Lebanese government to act firmly sometimes when it has to, because there are people in Lebanon who may not want it to act firmly against Syria or Iran or Saudi Arabia or the U.S. or Israel or whoever. So it's a very complicated situation. But clearly it's an issue, it's a problem that the Lebanese have to deal with, and it may actually be operative in this case. You may have some Lebanese who will be slow to do anything about these tensions and incursions along the Syrian-Lebanese border. By the way, when we speak of borders in the Arab world, we're really speaking about pretty, permeable frontiers. These borders are not strict
lines.
They're on paper, they're on the map,
yes.
But there's a lot of movement for many different reasons across the border. Smugglers, families, tribal links, political groups, commercial groups, all kinds of people.
Well, we know many of these borders have been created at a time that was very different and doesn't necessarily reflect the realities on the ground today. Joseph, I know you had a question as well.
Right. I mean, recently we've seen a lot of journalists, including Robert Fisk, start to throw around this term civil war happening in Syria. And do you think, I mean, you started to touch this a little bit, and it's very complex, I understand, but do you think that we're going to start to see a lot more outside influence inside Syria during this civil war? Specifically, Israel's having problems with the Palestinians at the UN. Hezbollah has stockpiled incredible amounts of missiles and weapons. This seems like this could be a conflict zone that would be mutually beneficial for a lot of players in the region. And as Syria goes into civil war, is this where it's going to start? Is it going to start in this valley?
I don't think Syria is going to go into civil war. I think Syria has really serious problems internally now, political problems and ideological problems. There are issues that the government has faced now that are major challenges to its legitimacy and its incumbency. But the government is still there. It commands a lot of support from many Syrians, while I would say half the country or more are challenging the government. So it's got real serious internal problems, and there is fighting, and thousands have died. Some government people, many opposition people, but it's not yet a civil war, I don't think. I think the danger that Syria faces right now is that it's starting to experience polarization in a way that was not the case before, where different national and ethnic and religious sectarian groups start to pull apart, possibly, with Kurds and Sunnis and Alawites and Christians and Druze and other different groups. And this is a problem that most of the Arab world faces, that the Arab world has rarely been able in the modern period to see an entire country in which all of the citizens are actually equal citizens with equal rights and feel that they're equal citizens.
Rami, I actually want to jump in there and ask you to stay with us into the post show. Ahmed has got an important tweet actually that I think would help us.
Yeah, I just want to get some of this into the live show. We have from Mahmoud, he says, I don't know how the Syrian revolution will ultimately affect Lebanon, but I do know the effects on Lebanon will be immense. So this is obviously a widespread held belief, but this one I want to just put to you before we go into the post show. Mahmoud Mughrabi says, any change in Syria certainly will have its huge effect on Lebanon, but I don't expect a civil war in Syria. He expects it in Lebanon, which you touched on, and I know that that's what Joseph asked you about, civil war in Syria, but many more people seem concerned, at least on Twitter, with civil war in Lebanon.
And so, Rami, we're going to ask you to hold your answer. We're going to take it into our online post show. Thanks so much for being with us today. Joseph, thanks a bunch for being with us as well. And Ahmed, great job getting the community involved. On tomorrow's show, we're going to look at music as a form of political protest in Pakistan. Stay with us in the meantime. We're going live to stream.aljazeera.com, where we will continue the conversation both on the situation in Lebanon and Syria, as well as on the UNESCO vote on Palestine. Tweet us at AJStream. We'll see you online. Hi, welcome to the Post Show. We're going to continue this conversation about what's happening in Lebanon, our incursions by the Syrian military into the northern parts of Lebanon, potentially destabilizing the country. We're also going to be speaking a little bit more about the question of the UNESCO vote on Palestine. Tweet us at AJStream. In the meantime, let's go right back to you, Rami. We left you with a tweet and this idea of the potential conflict that could ensue, but I want to get a little more of your insight. You've spoken a little bit about the prospect for civil war. I'm curious about what you think are the impacts upon civil society. How do you think that the Lebanese citizenry are responding or may respond to what is happening in their neighbor?
Well, Lebanon has always had a very vibrant and varied civil society because, for various reasons, the central government in Lebanon has been relatively weak, and power has been diffused around the country to all the different groups. And that's why you have people like Michel Aoun and Hezbollah and the Jmayil family and Hariri and Jumblat and all these sectarian or leaders or other leaders, tribal leaders, are very strong. And therefore, the civil society has been able to flourish because there isn't a central government there to kind of oppress it or control it, which is the case in most of the rest of the Arab world. And therefore, you have many different groups in Lebanon working for all kinds of things, whether it's secular laws or environment or women's rights or nationality laws or different issues. There isn't a lot that the civil society has been able to do, though, to really get in the way of the strong political forces. So if you get major political leaders who decide that they're going to fight it out on the street, or they're going to do something at the UN or something in the region, civil society is pretty weak in that respect and can't really influence national policy making or national trends. So I think this is one of the dilemmas that Lebanon has, which is great vitality and creativity in the civil society sector, but with limited impact.
Rami, speaking about all of the various political factions, which perhaps in Lebanon there's a record number out of most countries, we have a tweet from Hatshepsut talking about March 14th. It says, is March 14th, and then in parentheses, acting as a Saudi-US proxy, responsible for the arms smuggling into Syria?
Well, there's been a lot of reports in the press about that, and that the Saudis or Prince Bandar or people are funding this through the March 14 and the Hariris to work against the Syrians. These are reports that have never been confirmed, and so you just take them as you wish. It's clear that there is an ideological battle going on all across the region, and part of this ideological battle, well, the core of it is the Saudis versus the Iranians. And the Syrians are seen to be close to the Iranians. And it's possible that you've got some people who are against Iran now trying to weaken the Syrian regime. Because if you weaken the Syrian regime, Iran loses an ally in the region. Hezbollah finds itself isolated a bit. So who knows? But these are accusations, and we should not take them as fact until we see more evidence.
Rami, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So it's fascinating what's going on there, and I think it's going to be really intriguing. We had a show a couple weeks ago where we were talking about the possibility of external involvement, foreign intervention in Syria, and I think, or at least in a way that was similar to what happened in Libya, and I think one of the things that's so crucial for anyone looking at the region is that what happens in Syria is going to affect the entire region in a way I don't think you could really have said for Libya.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, and that's always been the case. And I think that's why Lebanese or people who are, interested in Lebanese politics or domestic affairs are so concerned, because even, we were talking about March 14th, the general secretariat of the group, Farid Suez, he came out and he said basically that, Syria is in fact trying to incite a civil war in their country, in his opinion, and they're exporting that to Lebanon. And Lebanon's been the, you could say the location for proxy battles historically for decades between Iran and Saudi and so on and so forth.
Well, it's going to be intriguing to watch what happens there. I want to actually go back to our first story today, especially since we've got you here, Joseph. And we got a really interesting question that was tweeted by @Ali-Gharib, and this is again regarding the UNESCO vote. And he's saying, would love to hear you on the potential for Cast Lead 2 maybe starting tonight. And well, we know Operation Cast Lead was the Israeli incursion into Gaza a few years ago. We see this quote, he's actually linking to this article from Ynet that's saying, We're nearing a dramatic decision to end rocket fire. This is a comment made by Cabinet Minister Silvan Shalom. What do you think about this?
I think this is really disturbing, and Israel does behave really kind of crazily sometimes when it gets its back up against a wall. And this UNESCO vote is demonstrating its back up against the wall. And so I was alluding with Rami that maybe we're going to see some Israeli activity in southern Lebanon. I don't think so, but it is likely that something's going to happen in Gaza. And I want to bring up this point that recently there was a terror attack in Eilat, or near Eilat, in which a number of kind of armed militants came in and shot up some people on a bus. Some soldiers were also shot. And very quickly, Israel blamed militants in Gaza and started doing airstrikes. And we were talking about another cast lead. Yeah. Now, it's come out in the Israeli press that, in fact, these militants were coming from Egypt. They were coming from Sinai. And they weren't really based in Gaza. And so the press kind of let this one slide. And I don't think that, at least I hope that it's not going to let this one slide, this current one. But we could see in the coming days some renewed airstrikes and then this cycle of violence happening again, which is just so detrimental to the region. So
I'm just curious to try to understand, what does Israel feel its interests are in this case? I mean, the response by the global community to Operation Cast Lead was very negative. You did see a reduction of rocket fire, but it did not cease. What would be the benefit of a second Operation Cast Lead? Does the Israeli body politic and citizenry think that the first operation was a success?
It's difficult to say whether they think it's a success. They do live in a reality in which rockets are falling on them, and so just an average person does live in that reality. Now, what they have to gain from it is a certain kind of bait and switch tactic. I mean, like Yousef was saying earlier in the program, the Palestinians are getting a lot of international support right now, a lot of visible kind of acclamation of their national struggle. And so what's the best solution for Israel right now, saying that, no, in fact, the Palestinians are not a member of UNESCO or shouldn't be. They're terrorists. They're firing rockets at us, and we have to strike them. And so it's worked time and again.
So I want to get some more comments from our online community, but let's flip the other side quickly before we switch it up. You know, there has been a back and forth ceasefires between Hamas and the Israeli military. We saw that Israel agreed to a ceasefire just a couple of days ago, temporary, and yet you see other militant groups, non-Hamas or related, or at least it's alleged, have been continuing to fire rockets. Is it possible, is there an argument to be made that Hamas does not actually have full control over what's happening in Gaza, and that Israel does have a legitimate security concern?
Well, Israel always has the argument of a legitimate security concern. The question is, how much did they provoke that legitimate security concern? And so I don't think that's the issue. Now, Hamas has demonstrated that it can control Gaza and its militants. And ironically, as Hamas has demonstrated more and more control, Israel is willing to now negotiate with this entity that it said is a terrorist organization. The Gilad Shalit deal shows that Israel will negotiate with Hamas, with an organization it deems to be a terrorist organization. And so we're in a situation in which the dialectics and the vocabulary and the semantics are kind of going all over the place, and we have to really analyze what's going on the ground. The Palestinian Authority is pushing for a two-state solution. The United States and Israel is blocking it at all costs, including, you know, taking away funding from women's equality programs in the developing world. And sorry.
No, I was just sorry. Forgive me. I just was going to interject with, there are questions though still that remain, I think, about amongst the Palestinian people in the diaspora, but also in the West Bank and in Gaza, about whether the two-state solution is the right option. I mean, it's true, you know, the Palestinian Authority is proposing the two-state solution, but many believe a one-state solution might be more realistic, more feasible. Without, I mean, I know we're broadening out the conversation.
I know that's a really good question I want to get to, but I do actually want to pose a question to you, since you brought up, you know, the way people are questioning the approach of the PA. I mean, some are saying that the PA has been undermined actually by the recent negotiation between Hamas and the Israeli military around Gilad Shalit and the other prisoners that were released, because they're saying, hey, you got tangible results. And yet, you know, the PA has gotten you membership into a cultural organization.
No, I mean, if the question is, like, is Hamas, you know, perhaps proven to be more effective? I think in terms of tangible results, many people view that, you know, resistance, whether nonviolent or violent, you know, whether you endorse violence or not, many people don't, at least Hamas was able to bring about results. And I think that's the question that is going to be put forth moving forward in terms of strategy, because, you know, for decades, Palestinians have been pursuing the negotiating table, but also nonviolence, and to very little effect. So, I mean, you know, that's not an incitement of violence, but Israel detains many Palestinians, so if Hamas detains Israelis and it's effective, perhaps that's a strategy. I don't want to take it back to this, but I think it's also relevant. I mean, I want to pose this to you, Yousef, before we leave. Tora Bear is saying by withdrawing funding, the U.S. loses their vote in UNESCO. And if the U.S. can't remain, it's their loss, not the rest of the world, because, as we know that if you're unable to fund UNESCO or you don't, do your funding duties, then you eventually lose your voting rights. Now, where I want to take it is to this report we saw yesterday of the Saudi royal who's backing a $1 million reward for anyone who captures an Israeli soldier. And I think that goes to the question that you raised, whether nonviolence or, trying to capture the enemy, so to speak, is the right method. What do you think of that, just quickly?
Well,
how will this play into things?
Like I said, we're in the middle of this kind of semantic battle, and so I think it's really tragic that the U.S. is willing to relinquish its role in an international organization of great importance because it's following a policy that basically violates its own directives of following a two-state solution. In terms of the Saudi prince offering this money, I think, like you said, I mean, Hamas got tangible results from doing a really kind of bad action, but it got the results it needed. And we have an Israel that's willing to negotiate with this Hamas. And so we might see more of this kind of thing.
It seems like such a very precarious situation because you've had the international community backing the Palestinian Authority, still exhibiting support for the PA through things like this UNESCO vote. But then you have Hamas presenting another alternative, and the United States, it's hard to see if the U.S.'s position is rewarding the PA or, in fact, ultimately rewarding Hamas.
Well, I mean, and also, he's a member of the royal family, and this is also a contentious issue, perhaps, between Saudi-U.S. relations if a member of the royal family is willing to give this kind of reward for potentially promoting violence.
Well, I think the big
Israel.
lesson from today's show is that there's nothing going on in the Middle East that doesn't have all kinds of international actors at play. Thank you, Yousef, so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Also, thank you, Ahmed, and thank you, our audience. As always, this conversation is definitely going to continue online. Tweet us at AJStream. We'll see you here tomorrow.